Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the former commander, NATO Allied Air Component Command, Lieutenant General Glenn Moorhead.
Damn, can't see her. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'd like to say thanks to General Wright for asking me to do this. He knows that I was the former Space Warfare Center Commander and the former Air Warfare Center Commander. He also knows that I had an F in Astro 452 at the Academy the first time I took it. But it was a high F. It was a very high F. But I'll talk about the panel here in a minute. General Thompson gave plenty of information about how important space is, so I'm going to cut those remarks out and get right to the panel. But let me tell you who's on there, and it's the order I'm going to talk to them about is a little different. The very first one is Major General Kim Crider, currently the Mobility Assistant to General Raymond. Second is General Mike Fantini, who is currently the A5 AFWIC boss, so he got challenged this morning with a bunch of taskers. Next, Major General Chance Saltzman, currently the Deputy CFAC at LUD. And finally, Colonel Retired Lance Spencer from AT&T. Before we start, I want to tell you a little about the thread we're going to try to run. Our topic is multi-domain operations and space capabilities integration. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about BIOS, something you don't have to read. A lot of you know Major General Saltzman because he led the multi-domain C2 ECCT for General Goldfein. He also led the Space Mission Force thing for General Raymond. So he's been around this block on multi-domain operations. Now his punishment was the chief sent him to LUD to be the deputy JFAC to learn how it all works. So the thread we're going to run today, we're going to narrow it down a little bit on particularly multi-domain operation and space capabilities integration in the Central Command, and CENTAF particularly. Second, General Fantini, Fanman Fantini, I think I can say this, is going to retire soon, and I want to say publicly to him and his wife, the Air Force surgeon, he has been a great warrior for our Air Force. And man. A Viper guy. He's got a great career, weapons school grad. I flew in his squadron at Aviano, the other squadron at Aviano. But anyway, so he's going to bring the thread from General Saltzman, bring that thread to what AFWIC's doing to solve some of the problems that he's got. And we're going to turn it over to Major General Kim Crider, who General Raymond calls the rock star of data. She's also a running rock star, 30 marathons. I've known her for, 15 years, something like that. 30 marathons, 5 Boston. She's a crazy, crazy woman. But she's going to pull the thread through the work she's doing with data, the Unified Data Library for Preston Dunlap, and how this all fits between these two. Finally, Colonel Retired Lance Spencer worked for me a couple of times. He is what I call a comm warrior. He's going to tie this all together. He currently is a legend nearly in the comm world, particularly in industry with AT&T, a great comm warrior. He's been everywhere, commanded at all levels, and all of them are not only great friends of mine, but they're great warriors, so we want to have fun with this thread. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Saltzman, and thanks General Deptula and everybody else. They set up our topic very well today, so I hope this flows very nicely.
Thanks, sir. So that was a lot of talking from General Moorhead. What I heard was I get to explain all my problems, and then these three are going to fix them. So, no, we give them the ops. So I'll try to be brief because I want to hear their answers as much as the crowd does, I'm sure. So the lessons that I've observed being at AF Forward at LUD for the last 10 months won't surprise anybody in this crowd that's been thinking about joint all-domain command and control, because these are lessons that I think we've continued to learn. And I think the question is, what's the next best step into starting to solve some of these problems? But I would categorize the lessons that I've observed in three main categories. One is technology. And I know that's something that's near and dear to everybody's heart. And we know that there's technology that can help us. We know the commercial industry and even government itself has technologies that we can apply as solutions. And I want to talk about that a little bit. The second category is expertise. And it is easy to brief and say multi-domain expertise, but we know how difficult it is to build experts in a single domain. When you start talking about building a true multi-domain expert, you have to dedicate a lot of time for experience. You have to dedicate special training, special education, and building the kind of multi-domain expertise that we need is going to be another level of commitment that we have to start to explore. And then the final piece, and it's kind of a broad category, and those that have heard me talk before, this won't be a surprise, but I just call it C2 structures. And that's everything from command relationships, getting support and supporting right, all the way down to the mechanics of how we do joint operational planning and how we build and support the kinds of operations that we think we need for multi-domain operations. And so let me just expand a little bit on technology. It's my experience in the AOR, and as I went around our Air Force looking at the multi-domain problem set, is that we are handcuffed by data feeds and firewalls right now. That's a dramatic oversimplification of it, but where you are determines the kind of data you have access to. Physically, where you are allows you access to certain information. And that handcuffs us in our ability to, one, have resilient data sources, but also to allow experts access to data that might not be generated where they physically sit or where they're located. And so, I mean, the pitch for technology, and I know General Crider is going to hit this in more detail, is that we have to think about universal, comprehensive access to data. Regardless of where you are sitting, you need access to all of the relevant data to solve your problems. And there are lots of solutions out there, you know, cloud-based, those kinds of virtual data structures have been talked about, but we need to start taking tangible steps into making data accessible regardless of your location. From an expertise standpoint, I want to make sure I'm saying this properly, because we do have multi-domain experts. And I see it out at LUD when we have operational planning teams that convene to get after some of our target set. And I'll see the space experts, and I'll see the cyber experts, and I'll see the air experts. And even in the AOC, you'll have air experts that are broken down into several different categories. And you put all of them at the table, and you've got a pretty powerful planning team. But I don't think that's enough. It's necessary, but I don't think it's sufficient to really get to multi-domain operations. When you start having somebody that is trained, experienced, and educated in all of the domains, and it's all in their head, it's a force multiplier. And the simple solution, and I'll use some easy math for Fan Man. 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, right? That's airspace and cyber experts sitting around a table. But if each of those 3 were independently experienced and trained in airspace and cyber, I think that's really 3 × 3 × 3. 27. There you go. So that's the kind of thing I think we need to talk about, is how we build multi-domain experts that can collaborate in a more force multiplying kind of way. And I think the 13 Oscar career field is a tremendous start along that line. And I think we're going to see, I've already got 3 trained 13 Oscars, the new multi-domain warfare officers, out in the CAOC at LUD, and they're already making tremendous headway there. So it's a great start. And then lastly, the command relationships, the C2 structures. And I just want to talk about support and supporting relationships real quick. And I know it's kind of a boring topic, and you see the org charts you have to always put up at the start of your briefs, but it really does matter. And I'll give you an example too. But if you think about it this way, space and cyber are largely going to be provided to a geographic combatant commander through a supporting relationship, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Cyber Command. There are some exceptions where things come into the theater and are chopped over, but by and large, space and cyber capabilities are conducted via supporting relationships. And what I've noticed out there is that when you're in a supporting relationship, generally speaking, you sit back and wait for requirements. The supported commander says, here's what I need you to do, here's the requirements I need satisfied, and the supporting commander determines how to meet those requirements. And that's worked for us for a long time. And the tighter those relationships, the more meaningful the requirements that we write, the better that relationship can be. But I don't think it really gets after true multi-domain integration, because there's a lot about space and cyber that the expertise and the chaos can't write the right requirements. We're not sure exactly what the capabilities are that can be presented back to us to the degree that U.S. Space and U.S. Cyber have. I need U.S. Space and U.S. Cyber to have ownership of the adversaries and be independently writing requirements about how to solve my problems. Then we start to collaborate as a team, and we build multi-domain plans that can then be executed. And I know that's a slight nuance, but I think that's really important moving forward. And so I'll stop there. I think there's a good vignette if somebody wants to ask me the question about June 20th when the Iranians shot down the RPA, and how in about 12 hours we had to pull together a multi-domain response plan to be executed, and it highlighted some of these deficiencies that we saw. But I'll save that for Q&A. Fan May.
Thanks, Salty. And it was my understanding there'd be no math, but all right. So I'm going to start off on the operational side of the house and to say, you know, air and space superiority are not a God-given right. And I think over the last 20 years, we've come to kind of think that. In the previous panel, when General Deptula talked about centralized control and decentralized execution, you know, these are things that we are going to have to fight for as a joint force. And that's where this joint all-domain command and control and the Air Force family of capabilities and family of systems coming together in advanced battle management is really our plan to attack that problem. And this advanced battle management thought is absolutely unconventional. You know, the words that are being used are intentionally being selected of flipping the script, doing things differently. We can't wait for 5, 10, or 15 years for the perfect solution. It's crazy talk to say we're not quite sure what the requirement is, but we're spinning towards that. And to get to Salty's point on this supporting relationship piece, it's really interesting. You know, the folks that are experts in that particular area have got to help the folks articulate what they can kind of do to support those requirements. And so I actually see a flattening of this command relationship aspects, and that's what we're seeing in various command and control war games and things like that. So this ability to kind of really embrace this development, operational security, or DevSecOps concept is really where we're driving. What is the air and space warfighting integration capability? What are we trying to do to help make that a reality? Our vision and the vision of the Air Force leadership is that we've got these relatively small teams that are empowered to matrix across the staff to get after a problem, cross-functional team. So everybody and their brother standing up cross-functional teams now. But what we're doing with General Kumashiro, Mr. Preston Dunlop out of the AQ Architect's office, and the good work that's happening between those is a poster child of how we get at these problems. The criticality of having the operational piece, the tech piece, and also the readiness piece tied together, working together across this entity, this cross-functional team, is immensely important and potentially successful. And so we're criticized right now, frankly, for, and rightfully so, of what are you doing for me today? And General Shaughnessy, General Brown, and General Harrigan this morning identified, you know, there's this temporal aspect and a tension between what we're doing today, where we want to be in the future, and it's our job to kind of link that together. And so I see these things as being iterative, frankly. We're not going to come up with a perfect solution tomorrow morning. And frankly, when we talk about low-hanging fruit, let's put some points on the board. Let's get some quick wins. I just template that in, what does progress look like? That's what we need to identify. We need to communicate that, and then we got to stay on message constantly. And that, in my humble opinion, is where this aerospace and cyber piece for the United States, for the Department of the Air Force is. And then we're actually taking that into this broader conversation with the Joint Staff and the Office of Secretary of Defense with respect to a joint warfighting concept and actually identifying lead services across various areas. Air Force being the lead service for command and control, Army being the lead service for information operations as well as, or information assurance operations and logistics, and the Navy being the lead service for fires. That is OSD and the Joint Staff forcing the services to work together. And that's a good thing. It's painful. It's not easy. We're building some element of trust across this enterprise. So not only are we getting our house in order within the Air Force, we're actually stepping up to this larger perspective across the Joint Force, which is absolutely where General Goldfein has been driving us. And I think there's a lot of goodness, obviously, across that. Not just that he's the chief, right? But so with that, that's kind of some of the things that AFWIC is trying to do from an integration perspective. And, you know, we kind of view the world waking up every morning, everything's kind of gray where we're trying to integrate. And every morning we find another JADC2 rock that we turn over that we find that we need to kind of work with some other entity to bring it together. So I look forward to your questions.
It really is an honor to be here on this stage with this group. You know, I've been kicking around this issue of data and data integration for quite some time now. And to be able to sit up here and talk with this group about how we really are getting after it and how we really are making those tangible steps real, Salty, on getting after making all the data available to the operators when and where they need it. There's been a lot that's gone on in the last couple of years that was fueled originally by the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to ensure that we had a clear and strategic focus on the problem of access and availability of data for warfighting. And General Saltzman, since the day I first met him, has been talking about this need to get a virtualized data environment available in the cloud so we won't have the problem that he's talking about. We won't be constrained by our physical location or who you know, right? That bro network of who has the data that I can get to, and if I could just get them on the phone, I could maybe, if I'm lucky, get access to some data sets that could help solve my problem. We've got a way to fix that problem, Salty, and it actually is real. Many of you know about the Unified Data Library. The Unified Data Library has been around for about 18 months, so it's relatively new. And it was developed in the space community. It was developed actually by a team from AFRL working with some small tech startup companies, now continued on by our Space and Materials Center. But it was developed because, just as we heard this morning, we're dealing with multi-domain threats. In an environment where we need to be out in front of those threats to deliver multi-domain effects, we need multi-domain data. And nowhere is that more true than in space, when we're talking about the space environment, space domain. Because space is fundamentally a multi-domain fight. Space relies on understanding not only what's happening in the space domain, as you heard General D.T. Thompson talk about this morning, but what's happening from other domains that could impact the space domain. And certainly there's been a lot of studies and a lot of articles written about the first war very well is going to begin in space or cyber. Space and cyber are inextricably linked. And we have to be able to understand the space domain, and all of the other domains that could impact how we're able to ensure our freedom of action in, from, and through space to be able to deliver those services to the warfighter across any AOR. So the Unified Data Library was created about 18 months ago, and it gets after that problem. But in getting after that problem, it actually solves the same problem that every other warfighter has in every other domain. It's a cloud-based environment. It's really at the heart of JADC2 and at the heart of what you see on the slide that was up previously for Advanced Battle Management System, and we can talk more about that. But it's cloud-based. It exists in an unclassified instance, a secret level instance, a TS level instance. This year, it will exist in a SAP level instance and will have a secret REL instance. It's pulling data in today from all domains, mostly space, but we have air, ground, maritime, intelligence, all domain data available through the data library. Highly resilient, highly secure, leverages a security architecture that was designed and built out by our IC community using their highest level standards that, for security and access control for the data. It's got a lot of features in it that allow us to ensure that the data is continuously monitored and managed, that we know who's using the data. The data owners actually maintain control of their own data. They decide who gets to have access to the data. And the developers that implement the data library work with those data owners on how to expose that data, how to make that data available to users based on those data owner defined controls. So that only authorized users would have access to the data. In those multiple levels of secure instances of the data library, there's also a guard system that allows for low to high movement of data. So if you're operating at a high side level, you can bring in data from the lower classifications. This year, we're going to implement bidirectional guards so that data can move up and data can move down, completely secured and properly tagged so that we don't have any leakages across the different classification levels. I can go on and on about the design of the data library, and we can take some questions on that. But it's important to know that this is the kind of capability that we've been pursuing. In fact, we're actually solving some of Salty's problems today in theater by replicating some of his critical data in the data library today, so that now he can ensure that he's not constrained to the physical location of being in theater in order to conduct operations. And we're going to be working towards a proof of concept of that in the next couple of weeks. So we're getting after it, Salty. And I look forward to your questions on how we can continue to advance this capability.
Lance, you're on.
Boss, thanks. Just a real quick background. General Moorhead mentioned I've worked for him a couple times. I was his 6 in Europe and Africa, and spent a lot of time in a combat content and a lot of dust on my boots. So I've gotten to experience, the tactical edge of the Air Force, as well as seeing a lot of what's going on in the private sector. So I thought General Saltzman kind of framed it up right when he talked about people, processes, and technology. And there's some things that are squarely the Air Force's problem to solve. The data, the process, the operational imperatives and those requirements driving things. A lot of the technology really can be gleaned from the private sector, I think. And it's stuff that's already existing in place. So, from perspective I'm going to talk from is, where I sit in AT&T, leading the Air Force business and a lot of the Space Force business and DoD business for AT&T. We're the largest communications company in the world. What's really important, though, is people think of us as about a network, but we're also the parent company for Warner Media. So that includes DirecTV and a lot of content. And so the integration and fusion of data and content with how you're delivering it is really becoming more and more important in modern communications and data availability and interoperability. Kind of the bottom line up front for the points I think I'm going to talk to and the perspective I'm going to share is mission partnership, because we consider ourselves a mission partner, and then leveraging private sector investment and capabilities. Don't reinvent something that already exists. Benefit from money that the private sector is already spending, and then use the Air Force TOA to spend things on what the Air Force really needs to be doing itself internally. Part of what I think is important is, when I'm sitting up here, I'm the AT&T guy, but everything we bring is really a coalition of alliances and partnerships. You may see the globe on some stuff, but it really is oftentimes hundreds of companies in our supply chain and our alliances that are working together, that are bringing capabilities to bear, that really helps, I think, bring best-of-breed capabilities for clients like the Air Force and Space Force. That's really important. As we're solving data problems, I think it's important to keep sight on the network. I mean, that's kind of the core thing of what I do. We live by the philosophy that seams are bad. And so, the biggest way to prevent access to data is to build a seam in your architecture, and then you can't get to it. So you can have all the greatest data in the world, but if you've got seams, that creates cybersecurity threats, but it also prevents interoperability of what you need and access to the data. So, when the chief talks about, connect the force with a global sensing network, it exists. What our challenge is to work together to figure out how the Air Force can leverage that and take advantage of it. Part of what I think is important when it comes to working with the private sector is different doesn't scale, different is bad, it costs more money, and it prevents that interoperability that I think the Air Force and Space Force is seeking. And it starts at basic kind of levels like in-house stuff's procured. It's kind of a misnomer when you talk about the DoD network. There's a lot of people that think that the DoD owns this network, when really they don't. Most of it's leased, and I provide a good chunk of that. But the way it's procured makes it hard for us to deliver the best-of-breed capability for the network. So trying to replicate commercial standards and processes when it comes to procurement and delivering capabilities, I think is important, because anytime, no matter how good the FAR is versus commercial terms and conditions, they're both great, but different drives workarounds and cost and complexity, and it just makes it a lot harder. So the more that the Air Force can look at how to leverage what companies like AT&T bring, I think is important. I think it's a great concept that Dr. Roper's been talking about with going back to the thinking of the Century Series. And I think that really applies also to the private sector mission partnerships also. We've been around for over 100 years supporting the DoD. Back in the days of like the Century Series, the ability to bring our combined teams together and solve problems together was happening. And I think the more and more the Air Force takes advantage of, bringing groups of private sector expertise into the room also, and tackling a problem together, everybody will benefit. One final thought from me is, and this is just kind of an awareness thing, multi-domain operations happens in the private sector also, as does space operations. We're a space operator. DirecTV is a space-based asset. We repurposed DirecTV satellites during the hurricane in Puerto Rico to provide long haul back to the U.S. so that communications could happen. And that kind of resiliency and agility is really important. Same thing with airborne. I mean, I'll use DirecTV as an example again. You watch DirecTV on the airplane. How's it get there? A lot of problems have been solved. We do similar kinds of things for Air Force One. Talk about command and control, the commander in chief. I'll wrap up, but more than 1 million miles of fiber, connecting the planet, operating over 200 countries. The footprints there, the undersea cable, that's all multi-domain, and the AI behind it to carry hundreds of petabytes of data a day. It can be crosswalked, I think, really easily into what the Air Force is trying to accomplish also.
Super, thanks. General Wright just reminded me that as the questions come in, we get paid by the number of questions we answer. So answer them quick. We got to get going here. So a lot of good questions. Thanks for everybody out there throwing these out there. The first one, because Lance was also very instrumental in standing up what is the cyber division of the weapons school. And Kim's been doing cyber all of her life. A lot of questions coming in about what are our vulnerabilities now that we're building all this, all the data everywhere, everybody, everybody's got it. Could y'all just touch real quick on cybersecurity, if you will?
So There's definitely a partnership between, well, it's a multi-level problem that we have to make sure we're working, right? So there's protecting the data, there's protecting the cloud, there's protecting the network. And all of these things have to work in unison, and protecting the applications for that matter. So cybersecurity has to be thought through that entire process. With regards to the data, Unified Data Library in particular, security and protection are paramount. And there's several ways in which we've specifically addressed security and protection of data with regards to Unified Data Library. Some things specifically. So many of you may be familiar with the way that cloud services are offered today. There are activity zones and availability zones that provide for some degree of disaggregation and federation of data in the cloud. We're absolutely taking advantage of all of that with our cloud service provider, providing us excellent security features of the cloud itself and the way in which that data is not all in one single place, literally, right, in the cloud environment. So that's a good thing. In fact, we've got 5 enclaves that we host our data in today in different locations throughout our cloud service provider environment that allows us for that degree of flexibility and resiliency. It also is fully synchronized. So anytime that we have to adjust for load balancing purposes, for performance or security purposes, we are able to ensure that all of our data is fully synchronized and available within less than a second. So that's all good. All of our data is also encrypted at rest and in transit. I mentioned access controls, big piece of how we're protecting the data, because only specific authorized users can get to the data at the classification level that they're authorized to access. And there are specific authorities that you have to have, and separation of authorities, whether you're a sysad, a security admin, or a data owner, you only have certain rights to interact with the environment. So those are just some of a few features that address how we address security. Of course, then working with the cloud provider and the network provider for other cybersecurity monitoring and monitoring usage of the environment as well.
And if I could just add to that real quick. So these are similar challenges that we, with our partners, work to solve for major Fortune 10 kinds of companies also, Wall Street and banks and things like that, to have serious data, rights and data protection kinds of concerns. And, they're getting pinged, millions of times a day by the Chinese and stuff. So they're trying to protect their data also. In the virtualized software-defined world, the network and cloud and the alliances we've got with the major cloud providers really become seamless. And seams are bad. I mentioned that before. Probably the biggest cybersecurity vulnerability is seams. So getting rid of those seams are important. It promotes interoperability, protects from the cyber perspective. Using the virtualized software-defined environments, we create microdomains, rings around things, around data sets and around applications, so that you're protecting at a very micro level the data for authentication, non-repudiation, and the commingling that can sometimes be a challenge. So there's a lot of ways to address this out there that's being used in the private sector.
Good, thanks. Real quick, here's a good question, General Fantini. As we push C2 forward and flatten our C2 structure, is it time to jettison the AOC construct? I know your team is working that, but General Holmes' team, just a quickie on that.
So, there's 3 questions, or 3 answers to all the questions, right? 50 mils, a lot, and it depends. It depends is, so the concept is, I don't necessarily see, generally humans need a place to work, right? But the thought is like, you might start off in a building, but if you need to disperse out of that building, you have connectivity that you're able to be mobile. And so from that concept, whether we have a brick and mortar facility or we have the connectivity and the connection into to the person on the loop to be able to assist with decisions. You know, the AOC will be around for some semblance of time, but it could go away in the future. And really, an operations center is really, you know, what we need, whether it's a space operations center, a cyber operations center, an air operations center. And I've heard this from General Wilson any number of times as the vice, is that, you know, he is enamored with, I can't remember if it's AT&T or, you know, this worldwide network of multiple networks and things come together is handled by 10 people. But if you walk into a combatant commander's operations center, you walk into a core operations center, you walk into an air operations center, you're going to have hundreds of people doing that. So the answer is, as we go through this temporal aspect of how we move into the future, we will have air operations centers now. As we move into the future, they will most likely become more dispersed. But it all depends on the commanders on how they want that to flow.
Super. One more.
It depends.
It depends. One more, General Fantini. Assuming AFWIC handles the strategy and integration and it's FAQ in charge of tech, who is the lead necessary for the culture change to ensure JADC2 is successful?
So I'd say the lead, I mean, ultimately, well, for joint all-domain command and control and advanced battle management, I view the cross-functional team lead as having that primacy from the perspective of tying the operations piece with the tech piece and with the readiness piece. But it is this strong relationship between the ops side of the house and the acquisition program side of the house that I see has been very powerful, not only in the joint all-domain realm with ABMS, but in position navigation and timing. That team is very, very far along, and because we have a strong relationship between the operational side of the house and the tech side of the house.
Super, thanks. General Saltzman, lots of questions on 13 Oscars. I think we probably have the expert in the room, at least on the development of that, and for all the domains. Throw out a couple comments on 13 Oscars.
It was just started from an idea that if you're going to really have experts with depth in any one area, you can't expect them to gain that experience, drop into the AOC, work for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, and then leave and go back to your primary career field. It was just an idea that you had to dedicate time and educational opportunities to a specific people who maintained that corporate knowledge. And that was kind of the genesis. I'm wearing my multi-domain warfare officer patch now. First class gave it to me. Like I said, we have the second class is ongoing at the 505th, and those are the real heroes down there at the 505th that built the curriculum that's training these people on multi-domain operational capabilities across all the airspace and cyber capabilities, as well as joint operational planning processes for air. And so you'll have in the AOCs people who are trained and educated in the mechanics of how to build an operational plan for air. And I mean that in the broadest sense of airspace and cyber. It saves a lot of time when you throw an OPT together and you have 12 hours to plan a mission. You're not going back into Joint Pub 50 and asking what the steps are. You've got mechanics there to help all of the senior leaders work through those processes rapidly. And so it's already paying off. I've already seen it personally with personnel out there in the AOCs helping lead these teams through and providing that multi-domain expertise. It's going to be a really powerful force multiplier for us.
Super, thanks. General Fantini, is the goal of JADC2 powered by ABMS attempting to solve a Joint Force Commander's problem or an Air Force problem, Air Force Component Commander's problem?
Yes.
Exactly.
No, so ultimately we view this as a part of this overall system, and advanced battle management and the programs that impacts, because it really impacts ultimately across numerous programs. That means it's across numerous program executives, and so we're going to have to continue to work to force that integration, and we're trying to push away from this. I don't have a requirement for that because that's the classic program manager's challenge in that they're generally don't have extra money to throw at this. So there you have it.
Super, thanks. Lance, a couple of questions on your base of the future question, the new base.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're referring to Tyndall.
Right.
We're on contract to bring the base of the future to Tyndall Air Force Base. I was just down there Monday, meeting with the AF North and the AOC and Colonel Laidlaw, the wing commander. Making some great progress, and again, it's about partnerships. So I will say we turned up 5G there last week, 463 meg download, pretty good. So we did a speed test on it. It's really about bringing innovation and the best operating enterprise available so that the Air Force can conduct its mission at Tyndall with leading edge technology and innovation. So we're working with a lot of our partners, including cloud providers and the people with the devices and the data science and all that to understand what's going on in the Tyndall mission as that's evolving and coming to bear, and then putting those capabilities in place. So it's pretty exciting.
Super. All right, we got 3.5 minutes left. What I'd like to do is, General Saltzman, if you'll throw out the 20 June shoot down discussion and run that thread. We got 3 minutes to touch on that. I think it answers a lot of the questions that are coming up.
I took a break from the AOR to get away from time compression, so thanks for the time. On June 20th, the Iranians shot down an RPA near the Straits of Hormuz. We were given 24 hours to execute response options. So from here are 3 targets to getting information to the crews so that they can start doing their planning. You need about 10 or 12 hours to load out the jets. You got to do wing level planning. So the operational level AOC had about 10 to 12 hours to put the plan together. At the 6-hour mark, National Command Authorities, whomever that is on the other end of the line, changed our targets. And so we had to go in about 6 hours from start to finish operational level planning. I only say all that timeline because it's important. One is we had the experts in the room that we were going to get. The idea that we could call in and phone a friend, get them up to speed, we certainly weren't going to get them there in the room with us. It just didn't seem feasible at the time. So the people sitting around the table were the ones building the plan. The data we had access to was the data that was resident there in the AOC. The targeting information that we had was the targeting information we had. These were mobile systems in some instances, which we wanted to have refreshed target development data, and we could not get it in the timeline. It existed, we could not get it in the timeline we needed. So data access, again, where we sat, challenged us based on what we could put together in the time allotted. And then secondly, this expertise idea. We were learning on the fly how to put the right products together so that we could roll in senior leadership with decisions in real time. And the space and cyber contribution of that was limited, extremely limited, because of who was in the room. We just simply didn't have the experts from a multi-domain standpoint there, or the time to pull in supporting commanders and integrate it. And if you can't build a multi-domain plan, you're not going to be able to conduct multi-domain operations.
General Fantini.
So real quick, if you pull the slide up then, so what I would offer is, so Salty's, he had a tyranny of time and distance. So if you had some semblance of the product lines that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, where you're operating from a cloud-based position, where you're able to reach virtually back globally to the information you need, he would have been able to utilize that from the space and cyber perspective. So you're taking the time component that we today use sneakers and yellow stickies to communicate. We're going to be able to do that in a virtual environment much more quickly. That's it, thanks.
And just to piggyback on that and keep the slide up, I mean, the Unified Data Library is essentially acting as Data One in this picture. And we've exercised the Unified Data Library once already in December at the on-ramp exercise, and we'll exercise it again coming up in April. And now, what General Saltzman was talking about is what we really need, and what these on-ramp exercises not only allow us to exercise technology, but they allow us to exercise the problems and the story that goes with that problem so that we know what's the right data that you need to get to the right decision maker when you need it. Back to the point raised by General Brown, I need the right sensor to the right shooter, and I can't deliver that with a unified data library or a data one capability unless I know the problem that the operator has.
Lance, you're closing us down.
That's right. I'll start
Make it big.
I'll
Make it
finish
big.
where I started. That mission partnerships and be innovative to find ways to allow the private sector to bring the solutions to problems that we've already solved that can apply to the Air Force also.
Super. General Wright, on behalf of us 5, thank you very much for the opportunity. The number of questions overwhelms the time we have. Thank y'all very much for throwing the questions out there. We'll work on them, particularly the cadets and the young folks out there that are asking tough questions. I just ignored them because they're too hard to answer. And so you get the socks. Because I've known General Saltzman for so long, he wears these socks crazy anyway. So this will work perfect.
We actually wear them. It's actually quite useful.